Alexander the Great. The story goes that one day he was walking down the road and he happened across a beggar on the side of the road, and the beggar decided to cry out to him. He was poor and he was wretched and he had no pull on Alexander the Great whatsoever, and yet as he called out for help, Alexander the Great stopped, and in response he turned around and he took 3 coins from a pouch, gold coins, and he threw them to this beggar. The people around him at this were shocked. One particular lady spoke up and challenged him in the middle of this and said, you know, why did you give him so much? That was an incredible amount of money even back in those times. And he looked back at her and said this, dear lady, he needed more than just silvers. Gold coins suit the giving of Alexander the Great. I don't know about you, but I was thinking to myself, why did this guy refer to himself in the third person? That's weird. But it does reference what I want to talk about today. Ridiculous generosity. Today we have a brand new series that we're starting, and believe it or not, we're not alone. In fact, I had the privilege of getting together with some of the other pastors in the Wesleyan Church, and over the Christmas season we're going to be kind of preaching on the same topics. And so this morning, if you went to Yarmouth, or if you went to West Head, or Shelburne, or Woods Harbor, or Havelock, or even Port Maitland, you would find that we share a topic today. And you would find that we have a united heart, too. And we're going to talk more about that as time goes by. But you're probably wondering what in the world generosity has to do with the Christmas story. We're going to get to that, too. But before we do all that, I want to tell you what's to come. Over the next 5 messages, we're going to be exploring the generosity of God. We're going to be talking about Him as the author of generosity. We're going to be talking about our response and how we ought to learn His generosity in our own lives. We're going to be talking about what generosity in action looks like in our lives. And we're going to be talking about the church in general, as far as what does a generous church look like. And so these are what we're going to be exploring over the next 5 weeks. But here's the cool part, and this is kind of the crown on the top of this that I'm most excited about in the middle of this. One of the things that we share as a passion amongst our churches is that we want to do more than just talk about being generous. We want to actually put feet to this message. And so over the next 5 weeks, we're going to be unrolling some ways in which you can be involved in this message, in kind of the feet portion of this message. Yet before we begin, I want to start at the very beginning. This morning, I want to retell a story. For some of you, this is a very old story. And yet at the very same time, it is a very true story. And like any really good story, it has a central character that I want to focus on this morning. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 says this, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And we are introduced for the first time to a character who is simply called God. And I say that he's the central character in this because over the next several verses, what you'll find is he literally creates everything that's in existence. He creates the universe and sets it into motion. He creates ecosystems. He creates life and creates this luscious environment. And in the middle of this luscious extravagance that he creates, what he does is he creates man and sets him into the center of it. Man is a different kind of creation for God. In fact, what it says in the Bible is that he literally reaches down and he takes his fingers and he molds him from the ground. And then from his own being, he breathes life into him. But then he takes him and he puts them in the middle of this creation that he has created. How many of you love going to a hotel? I love going to a hotel. Everything at a hotel is stuff that I don't have at home, generally speaking, if you get a nice room at all. A little while back, I had the privilege, or I tried to be really romantic in this whole thing. And so what I did was I did some research online to find a really nice hotel room. And then Laura and I took care of all the arrangements, and Laura and I went away for a night. And I mean, when we got there, what we did was we went out first and we got some of our favorite food from one of our favorite restaurants in Halifax. And then we went into this room, and sure enough, it was everything that it had promised on the internet. It had this great big huge king-size bed, and there was a jacuzzi over in one corner, and there was a walk-in shower in this great big bathroom, and there was a great big screen TV with satellite on it, and a fridge with food in it, and it was all these things that I don't have at home, right? And so we just kind of enjoyed ourselves in this place and lived in the lap of luxury for 24 hours, more or less. And you know, when you look at Genesis chapter 1, this is exactly the picture that is being presented here in this particular place. Man is living in luxury. Everything that he could possibly need or want, it's there at their fingertips. I mean, everything belongs to God. You need to catch that, right? It didn't belong to mankind, but man was set in the center of it, and it was there prepared around him for man's benefit. Just kind of like going into a hotel room, right? It's there for your benefit. In fact, the only thing that God found missing in the mix of this, and if you read down through this particular scripture, the only thing you'll find that man finds missing in the mix of this is a mate. And so God even takes care of that. And in fact, he marches all the animals through just to make sure that there's no mate that matches him, that he could enjoy this luxury with. And then he puts man into a sleep, and he creates the perfect partner for him so that they could together live in this luxury environment. So what we're talking about here is a being that's, in all honesty, acting really strangely. Right? I mean, stop and think about this for a moment. I understand selfishness. Right? You understand selfishness. But this is a God that's very different from anything that we understand. I mean, have you ever stopped and wondered what it would be like to have the kind of power that God has in Genesis chapter 1? I mean, I stopped and thought about that this week for a little while. And you know, I think if I was rewriting the story, it would look a little bit like this. And Kevin said, "Let there be a peanut butter tree." And there was Skippy peanut butter for everyone, and everyone in the land rejoiced. Right? Or it might look like this. And Kevin said, "Let all houses come with massive garages with lots of tools and souped up trucks. And all the men of the land begin to start grunting like Tim the Toolman Taylor." Right? Something like that. Or Kevin said, "Let every top drawer of every desk in every office be filled with unlimited supplies of M&Ms. And it came to be that he got fat. And so Kevin said, "Let me be thin and good looking, and now you really know that I'm dreaming." Right? And we laugh. Sure we do, because we know that this is true. If we had powers like this, I believe that some of us would do some noble things with it, but where would it end up? It would end up right back here with me, wouldn't it? I mean, ask anybody if they were given $1 million what they would do with it. And see how many people jump up and tell you things that they would do with their money that have absolutely nothing to do with them. Every one of us names all the things that we would do if we just had that $1 million. And when it comes to this whole thing, I mean, we understand selfishness. But God pours out his love and generosity on mankind. And let me show you just how much he proves this, how wide and deep his generosity goes. In Genesis chapter 3, mankind willingly turns his back on God. There's this lush garden that he's in. He finds himself in purity, in completeness. And everything that is there is theirs for eternity. And yet, they set it all aside and choose their own way. And as they choose their own way, catch this and imagine this. God allows them to. You see, this morning, what I want to talk to you about as we begin this series is this question. Who is this God of Genesis chapter 1 and 2? Because you and I are children of Genesis chapter 3 and beyond. And the story gets twisted from that point out. And so we're often confused by this story. In fact, there's a lot of people in our world that would look at you this morning and tell you, when it comes to this God character that we're talking about this morning in this particular chapter, that if there even is a God, that he doesn't care about you. And what they would look at in this chapter is this. They would say that God walked away from mankind at this moment when man turned his back on them, all the while not understanding God at all. Now, why do I say this morning? It's because, you see, the story in Genesis chapter 1 and 2 is not the story of God giving a one-time gift and walking away. In fact, at any moment, we've already talked about this, he could have wiped us out at that moment. He had the power to be able to do it if he did not care about us. But instead, let me ask you a different question this morning. Put yourself in the shoes of God for a moment. If God really does love us and really does care for us, what if this generosity thing never stopped being part of his character? Consider instead this question for a moment. How do you pour out your love on somebody who has walked away from you? How do you do that? And what I want to suggest to you this morning is this, that in response to this, God does something that might surprise you. As man walks away from him, in that moment, what he did was allow his generosity to chase us and to win us. Do you know what mankind's big beef with God has always been? It's not that he's given us the gift of free will. It's the consequences that we reap because of that free will. We want God's generosity in our lives. I believe that. We want his generosity in our lives. But I'm not sure we want the responsibility that comes with that generosity. What you see in chapter 3 is Adam and Eve, ultimately, you and me, as we walk away from God and choose our own way. But that's exercising the generosity of God in the form of a gift of choice that we have been given. Choosing our own way, walking away, and blaming him for it. Ever thought about it that way? Yet what I want you to see this morning is a very different picture of God. In fact, what I would have you see this morning is that in Genesis chapter 1 and 2, it is your first introduction to a generous God who has never ceased his generosity. I would have you see a God in Genesis chapter 3 and beyond whose generosity has only grown and become more lavish in our lives since the garden. I would have you find a God this morning who has poured out his love on you, dear friend. So let's talk about this for a few moments. Do you want to know how God's generosity is poured out on us every single day? I have 3 different ways that I want to share with you that we can see his generosity in motion. Number 1, our God always has shown his generosity with his presence. What do I mean by that? Well, I want you to understand this morning that God pursues you. He pursues you. In fact, there has not been a day gone by on this rocky path that we ourselves actually chose to go down where he has ever turned his back on any one of you. That's why, by the way, it says in Joel chapter 2, verse 32, everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. You realize that there has never been a single day in your life when the presence of God has not stood at your back. Intentionality and availability have always defined who God is. I mean, have you ever read Psalm chapter 139? It is an incredible chapter to read just by itself. But I want to read to you the first 12 verses and listen to how the psalmist looks at this whole idea of generosity chasing after him by God in his life. You search me and you know me, Lord. You know when I sit down and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. You hem me in, behind, and before. You lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to obtain. Where can I go from your spirit, he says. Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I go down to the bed, if I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn and settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me and the light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you, and the night will not be dark for you. The night will shine like the day, and the darkness and like the light for you. I mean, don't you get this morning? You may not even believe in God this morning, and still he pursues you. So that even the gentlest whisper from your mouth, he hears your voice, and he knows your name, and he reaches out with salvation in mind. Over and over again, you will find it recorded in the Bible of man doing his own thing, and God pursuing him, and intentionally intervening in his life, being available to those who call on him, rescuing them over and over and over again, giving them purpose and love and direction and hope in their lives. Do not ever underestimate the generosity of the presence of God when you invite him into your life. You will never find him sleeping. You will never find him unprepared. He stands at your door. The Lord who is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, and rich in love, and he waits for you to open up and allow him in. Number 2, our God always has shown his generosity through his presence. Number 2, with anticipation. Not only does God pursue you, he plans for you. Now, I have to tell you, it's not going to be a big secret to anybody here, I am not the sharpest tool in the shed. I make all kinds of mistakes, and yet at the very same time, when it came to this night with Laura, I really wanted to do things right. And so for a month before, what I did was I squirreled away money without her knowing, so that we could pay for this hotel room. I did research on the net to find the right hotel, because a lot of times they show a picture on there, and what they show is their best room, not the room that they're actually going to give you. And so I had to make some calls to make sure that the room that I wanted was going to be the one that I got. We had an international student at the time, so I had to make arrangements for somebody to take care of her, and there were some other calls that I made. A friend had to take care of Elijah for us overnight, and somebody else had to take care of our dog, and so we had all these things that needed to be taken care of. But you know what? I got to tell you, it was so much fun. I took Elijah up to the bus that morning. I came back. He was in on it. He knew what was going on. It was so much fun to come back and walk in the door and say, "Laura, pack a bag." And she's like, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "We're going away for the night." And she said, "But what about?" And I said, "It's taken care of." "But what about it? It's taken care of." "What about it? It's done. I made all the plans. It's taken care of." Listen to John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Verse 2. And in him was life, and that life was the light of mankind. Verse 11. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believe in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent or of human decision or of husband's will, but born of God. And the Word became flesh, and it dwelt among us. I mean, you need to check this out. God is not just generous with his presence. Friend, you need to understand today that he has a plan for you and all mankind. And by the way, that plan was Jesus. It was Jesus right from the very beginning. Do you want to talk about what the Christmas story is all about? Why we are doing generosity for this? Because the heart of the Christmas story is the generosity of God in giving his Son for you and me. It is Jesus in a manger. Romans chapter 6, verse 6 and 8 says this: "See, just at the right time, when we were still powerless, God died. Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous man, though a good person, sometimes might die, possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his love in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." God, in all his generosity lavished upon us, sent his Son, who took on flesh and dwelt among us, and laid down his life for us. A baby Jesus arrives in the scene, not to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. It is a husband doing his best to pour out his love for his wife by taking care of every single detail, so that when it was done, it was done. Do you realize that God is so generous in his relationship with you and me, that when you turn to him and you bow your heart before him and return into a relationship, that not only does he just forgive you. Psalm chapter 103, verses 10 to 12 says this: that he does not treat our sins as they deserve, or repay us according to our iniquities. For as far as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, as far as he has removed our transgressions from us. Listen, he doesn't just clean us. He makes us, the Bible says, whiter than snow. He doesn't just cleanse us in our hearts. He makes us pure again. He doesn't just let your sins go, dear friend, this morning. He restores you. So boundless is the love of God. I mean, you want to talk about generosity. There is no man or woman or anything else in this place beyond the scope of the salvation that God offers you. There is no way to slip through the cracks with him or be disqualified. You can't break him or bankrupt him in this. He anticipates this is you and me from the very beginning and plans for us, even at the cost of his own son. In Psalm chapter 139, it says this, before a single day came to be. That's how extensive this was. This is how generous he is. It's how generous he always has been. Despite the fact that some of us have looked that generosity in the face and then walked away. Which brings me to number 3. God always has been showing his generosity through his presence, pursuing us, through his anticipation, planning for us. But then, thirdly, this morning, without limit. Friend, he not only pursues you and plans for you, he pines after you. Let's just talk openly for a moment this morning amongst ourselves. Out of our experience, for those of you who are followers of Jesus this morning in this place, if I was to ask you to consider your relationship with God this morning, and if I was to ask you to consider his generosity in your life and how he has shown you generosity in your life and his love for you, how would you describe it? I don't know about you, but it's difficult to come up with words, isn't it? I mean, that's where I found as I was sitting down to try to answer that question myself. I found myself writing down some things, but it took me almost an hour to kind of come up with what I'm about to give you. His love for me, his generosity, it is sacrificial. It is redemptive. It is far-reaching. It is intimate and experiential and unyielding and transforming in my life. It is rich in mercy and unsearchable, and yet at the very same time present in my life. It is indescribable. I know that's a tricky word because I just did a bunch of descriptions, didn't I? And yet at the very same time, I want you to understand today that it's okay not to be able to totally explain what I'm talking about this morning. For, I don't know about you, but it pushes me. It draws me. It calls me to him. I mean, don't you just love Ephesians chapter 3, verses 14 and 19, when Paul looks at the church and he says this, I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have the power together with all the Lord's people to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Jesus. And to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of the fullness of God. You know why I planned this getaway with Laura? Because it was a husbandly thing to do for a wife? No, actually that didn't enter into it at all. I wish I'd probably be actually a better husband if that had entered into that. Because I should be doing that on a more regular basis, actually. Because I was looking to get out of town and take a couple of days off. No, that was a byproduct. I enjoyed that part, but that wasn't why I did it. I did it because, silly as I am, it's taken me years to learn that once in a while Laura likes to be swept off her feet. And she needs to know that I'm still pursuing her, even though we've been married for over 17 years. She didn't look at me, so I guess I got the date right on that. So. Don't you see it? I mean, go deep and explore long, and you cannot outlove God. You can't outgive him. You can't even find the edge of his grace in your life. For those who have come to him, it literally stretches from before time began clear to eternity. I mean, its scope is gold in a world full of coppers. 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 17 to 21 totally sums this entire message up. And probably John is sitting back there thinking, well, why didn't you just read that in the first and then we'd be done this, right? But listen to what he says in this particular scripture. Live out your time as foreigners here in reverent fear. Why? For you know that it was not with perishable things such as silver or gold that you were redeemed from the empty way of life handed down to you through your ancestors, but by the precious blood of Christ. A lamb without blemish or defect. He was chosen before the creation of the world, was revealed in these last times for your sake. Catch verse 21. Through him you believe in God, who raised him from the dead and glorified him, so that your faith and hope are in God. You know, I was trying to find some stories about generosity in action, and I came across an article this week called 14 Amazing Stories of Generosity. And in the stories that were presented in that, there's a lot of really cool stories. One of them was of a guy who bought a Christmas tree and didn't like it, and so he bought a second Christmas tree and decided to put the first Christmas tree on Kijiji for free. And in the process of this, he received 40 letters from people who wanted this Christmas tree, who couldn't afford the access of this extra thing at Christmas time. One of the stories was from that was shared in this particular story was from somebody who had, I think, 6 kids or something like this. And so their tradition each year had been to take a poster board and draw a tree on it and hang it in the corner because they couldn't afford a Christmas tree in their life. So you know what this guy went out and did? He went out and bought 40 Christmas trees so that nobody would go without. Somebody found out about it and added 40 sets of ornaments to go with that. There's another guy that his brother died. So to honor his brother, he went to 50 different states, and he had 50 different dinners at 50 different restaurants, and in each of these restaurants, he paid $100 for the meal and left a $5,000 tip. Wow. Just to remember his brother. There's another guy that is shared that walked into, in fact, his name's Paul Walker. You may know that name. He's an actor. Nobody knew about this until after he died, apparently, but apparently he walked into a jewelry shop at one point, and there was a soldier there trying to buy a ring for his fiancée who was about to ship out, and was totally shocked by the prices, trying to figure out some way to do a payment plan with the person behind the counter. And when Paul heard about this, he put the money up right there so that this guy could get this ring for his fiancée. You'll find another guy that went out through the grocery store line. He gave his credit card to pay for the next 10 people in line. Just totally overwhelmed them. When they got up to the grocery store, they went to pay and said it's paid for. Another guy who went in and went to Walmart to the layaway department and paid everybody who owed $200 or more. Spent $20,000. Imagine. An airline. They got Santa to come in while people were waiting for their air place. Recorded them in what they asked Santa for Christmas. Had their presents ready wherever they landed. Pretty cool story. But they missed the most incredible one of all. John chapter 15 that we read last week says this, "My commandment is this, love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." If you want to understand generosity, you need to look no further than your Father in heaven. He is our example and the champion, the author of generosity. There is no one and there is nothing who has ever loved you as much as he loves you, and who has ever offered you the extravagance such as this. That before you knew him, his generosity cost him the life of his son to take away the sins of the world. That when you come to him, you find his generosity is more than enough to cover you, and it overwhelms you in just how complete it actually is. That when you live for him, his generosity will humble you each day and shock you by just how wide and how long and how deep is his love for you. For who is this God that we serve? Friends, he is a generous God. I want to invite you guys to close your eyes, bow your heads. It's this weird thing, if you're new at our church, where I just get people to kind of think about the things that we've talked about. This morning, I just want you to kind of think through some of the things that we've been talking about. And I want to ask you this one question. How do you respond to the generosity of God in your life? In the next couple of minutes, here's what's going to happen. The band's going to come and we're going to play a song in the background. The song is irrelevant. It is a song that we played here before, though. It's called The Reckless Love of God. I thought it was appropriate way kind of to finish this service off. But what I want to invite you to do is to respond to the generosity of your Father in heaven. And I know that for some of you this morning, that will mean you sit here for the next several minutes, and what you do is you'll find yourself just saying, God, thank you. thank you for this and thank you for that. Listen, there's nothing wrong with going through and naming the things that God has been generous in. Guess what? That is a natural and a totally appropriate way to respond to the generosity of God within our lives. And yet at the same time, I suspect that there may be somebody else here who, the truth is, all you can think of right at the moment is this: I need the generosity of God in my life. Because you know, as you sit there today, that you need grace in your life that doesn't have edges to it. Or you need strength to help you see your way through, or you need hope to see your way through tomorrow, or you need a father who will walk beside you. And so what's going to happen is we're going to sing. And what I want you to do, in fact, what I encourage you to do is over the next song, if you want to sing with us, you can. But listen, I would encourage you to keep your eyes closed and you just your heart bowed before Him, and just take some time over this next song and stop and cast your cares on Him, for He knows your need today, and He longs to bring healing and salvation to your soul. So let's pray together. Lord, over this next few minutes, we're just going to bow our hearts before You. I know that there's some people in this place that they're going to be doing some business with You, because the truth is they know that what they need in their lives right now is they need a God who loves them, who cares for them, who has what they need. And it is such a privilege to come before a God who answers that need. But I also think there's a bunch of people in this place that know about the generosity of God. This morning, as we bow before You, Father, what we really want to do is just say thank You. So, Father, as we sing this song, I pray that You would hear the praises of Your people for the reckless love of God that You have given to us so freely. I pray these things in Your precious name. Amen.